A woman saves a leopard cub from dying of thirst, but how it thanked her shocked everyone. Out in the blistering heat, she thought she was rescuing a helpless animal. But what she didn't know was that this single act of mercy would pull her into a hidden world of power, secrets, and danger. The cub wasn't just lost. Its suffering wasn't just an accident. And the closer she looked, the more terrifying the truth became. Behind the fences, something darker was at work, something that could destroy her family, her safety, and even her life. When kindness collides with corruption, when saving one life exposes a deadly lie, the real question becomes, what was the cub trying to reveal, and will the truth set her free or get her silenced forever? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story, The Merciless. Texas sun beat down on Hollis Keene as she trudged along the fence line of Marrow Preserve, her well-worn boots kicking up clouds of dust with each step. Her cotton work shirt clung to her back, and she pulled her faded baseball cap lower to shield her eyes from the glare. The parched landscape stretched out before her, telling a story of prolonged drought that made her heart ache as a well technician. Hollis had seen her fair share of drought damage, but something about this scene felt different, wrong. The water troughs that dotted the preserve's boundary were bone dry, their metal surfaces almost hot enough to burn. She pulled out her tablet, making careful notes about the ground moisture levels and structural integrity of the nearby wells. A weak sound, barely more than a whimper, caught her attention. Hollis froze, her trained ears trying to locate its source. There, behind one of the empty troughs. She approached cautiously, her heart stopping when she saw what lay there. A leopard cub, no bigger than a house cat, lay sprawled in the dust. Its spotted coat was dull, its small chest barely moving. Hollis dropped to her knees beside it, professional caution forgotten in the face of such desperate need. The cub's tongue was cracked and dry, its pulse thread-thin beneath her gentle fingers. "Hold on, little one," she whispered, already reaching for her field kit. Years of working in drought conditions had taught her to come prepared. She pulled out a small 4-bag of saline solution, meant for emergency hydration of livestock, and some rubber tubing. With practiced movements, she jerry-rigged a makeshift hydration system. "This isn't exactly standard procedure," she murmured to the cub as she carefully inserted the line. But desperate times call for desperate measures. The cub didn't even flinch as she worked, a sign of how weak it had become. Hollis cradled the small creature's head, monitoring its breathing as the fluid slowly began to take effect. Gradually, its pulse strengthened under her fingertips. Relief flooded through her as the cub's eyes fluttered open, revealing golden irises clouded with confusion and fear. "That's it," she encouraged softly. "You're gonna be just fine." "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The booming voice made Hollis jump. She looked up to see a tall man striding toward her, his silver hair gleaming in the sunlight, and his expensive boots raising dust with each angry step. She recognized him immediately. Clint Marrow, owner of the preserve and one of the most powerful men in the county. His tailored Western shirt and pressed jeans spoke of wealth, but it was the cold fury in his eyes that commanded attention. This animal needed immediate medical attention, Hollis said, keeping her voice steady despite the sudden pounding of her heart. She gestured to the empty trough. "There's no water. You're trespassing." Marrow cut her off, his voice sharp as a razor. "This is private property, and that animal is part of my collection." Hollis stood slowly, positioning herself between Marrow and the cub. "Collection? Sir, this is supposed to be a sanctuary. That cub was dying of thirst." She noticed movement. In her peripheral vision, preserve employees appearing from various directions, but keeping their distance. None would meet her eyes, their gazes fixed firmly on the ground or distant horizon. The sight made her stomach twist. Marrow stepped closer, using his height to loom over her. I don't recall asking for your opinion on how I run my preserve, miss. Keene, Hollis Keene. I'm a well technician conducting a drought survey of the county's water systems. Well, Miss Keene, he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Your survey ends at my property line, and you've crossed it. He glanced around at the pristine signs and polished brass plaques that decorated the preserve's entrance. Each bore the Marrow Preserve logo, gleaming despite the dusty air. I suggest you pack up your little medical experiment and get off my land. Now. The cub had managed to sit up, its small body trembling. Hollis knew it needed more care, proper veterinary attention. But the way Marrow's employees avoided looking at her, the threatening undertone in his voice, everything about this situation felt long. I'll go, she said finally, carefully removing the IV line from the now stabilized cub. But you should know that animals dying of thirst in a sanctuary, that's the kind of thing people notice. The kind of thing they report. Marrow's facade cracked for just a moment, revealing something dark and dangerous beneath. Is that a threat, Miss Keene? No, sir. Just an observation. She packed her kit with deliberate movements, trying to hide the trembling in her hands. The cub watched her with those golden eyes, stronger now, but still vulnerable. Let me be clear, Marrow said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. What happens on my land is my business. If you know what's good for you, you'll forget. What do you think you saw here today? Hollis shouldered her pack and walked away, feeling Marrow's eyes boring into her back. She forced herself not to run, not to show the fear that made her want to flee. The preserve's entrance gate clanged shut behind her with an ominous finality. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Hollis lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it stirred the warm air. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the leopard cub's desperate face, heard the weakness in its cry. She thought about the empty water troughs, the averted gazes of the preserve's employees, the calculated menace in Clint Marrow's voice. Something was very wrong at Marrow Preserve. The sanctuary label was clearly just for show, a pretty facade hiding ugly truths. How many other animals were suffering behind those polished gates? How many people had looked the other way, intimidated by Marrow's power and influence? Hollis sat up, reached for her laptop. Her hands hovered over the keyboard as she thought about Marrow's threat. Making an official report would put her squarely in his crosshairs. She'd seen the power he wielded, the way people feared him. This could cost her more than just her job. The image of the dying cub flashed through her mind again. She thought of her father, who taught her that doing the right thing wasn't always easy, but it was always necessary. With determined keystrokes, she began documenting everything she'd seen at the preserve. Hollis knew she was making herself a target, but someone had to speak up for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Someone had to shine a light on what was happening behind Marrow Preserve's gleaming gates. As she typed, she could almost feel the target being painted on her back, but she kept writing anyway. Some things were worth the risk. The county water office smelled like old paper and stale coffee. Hollis shifted in the hard plastic chair, her stack of carefully prepared reports clutched in her hands. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she watched yet another official shuffle past without making eye contact. Miss Keene? A tired-looking clerk finally called her name after 2 hours of waiting. I can take those forms now. Hollis approached the counter, her hopes rising slightly. I need to file these reports about water usage violations at Marrow Preserve, she explained, sliding the paperwork across the counter. There's documentation of, Marrow Preserve. The clerk's expression changed subtly. I'll make sure. These get to the right department. The papers disappeared into a drawer with barely a glance. 3 days later, when Hollis called to follow up, no one could locate her paperwork. Must have been misplaced in processing, was the vague response. You'll need to file again. The state wildlife hotline proved equally frustrating. We take these matters very seriously, the voice on the phone assured her with practiced politeness. Someone will contact you within 5 business days. No one ever did. By her 4th attempt to file reports, Hollis was ready to scream. That's when she met Rhett Navarro. The wildlife warden caught her eye across the county office lobby, his broad shoulders and quiet authority standing out among the bureaucratic shuffle. Unlike the others, he didn't look away when she approached. "I couldn't help overhearing," he said in a low voice, gesturing to a quiet corner. "You're trying to report issues at Marrow Preserve?" Hollis nodded wearily, trying being the operative. "Word. Tell me everything," Rhett said, pulling out a small notebook. His dark eyes were intent, focused. For the first time in weeks, someone was actually listening. Hollis told him about the dying leopard cub, the lack of water, and her suspicions about improper resource management. Rhett took detailed notes, asking pointed questions that showed his expertise. "I believe you," he said finally. "But Marrow has friends in high places. We'll need solid evidence." "I can get it," Hollis said firmly. "I just need someone to actually investigate when I do." A week later, Hollis was back at the preserve's boundary, this time with purpose in her steps. The morning sun cast long shadows. As she walked the fence line, her trained eye scanning for anomalies. That's when she spotted it, a fresh feed line partially covered by disturbed soil, its metal surface stamped with AB5. Her heart began to race. As a well technician, she knew exactly what this meant. The line's 4-inch diameter and positioning could only mean one thing. It was pulling water from Aquifer Branch 5, one of the region's critical water sources. And there was no permit flag or registration marker in sight. Hollis pulled out her phone and started taking photos, carefully documenting the line's path as it disappeared toward the preserve's pump shed. She knew the legitimate wells on the property. This wasn't one of them. "Found something?" Rhett's quiet voice made her jump. He'd arrived right on time for their planned meeting. "Look at this," Hollis pointed out the feed line. 4-inch diameter. Pipe running straight toward their pump shed. The soil's been recently disturbed. This is new installation work. Together they walked the terrain, marking GPS coordinates and noting subtle patterns in the ground. Shallow depressions dotted the landscape, sink patterns that shouldn't exist with proper water management. "See how the soil's compacted differently here?" Hollis pointed out. "Classic sign of underground water movement. They're pulling way more than they're reporting." Rhett's expression was grim as he photographed the evidence. "They're using their legitimate wells as cover for an illegal siphon operation. Probably been doing it for months, maybe years." Hollis meticulously recorded meter numbers from the visible equipment, her technical background allowing her to spot irregularities in the readings. "These flow rates don't match what they're reporting to the county." "Mara's got half the county board in his pocket," Rhett warned, his voice low. "And the other half won't want to rock the boat. We need to be smart about this." They stood in the morning silence, studying the evidence they'd gathered. The decision didn't need to be spoken aloud. They both knew what had to happen next. They needed to verify the full extent of the diversion operation before they could push for enforcement. It would be dangerous, but they had no choice. "We document everything," Hollis said firmly. "Build an airtight case they can't ignore or bury." Rhett nodded, his expression determined. "I'll start quiet inquiries about their water usage reports. You keep tracking the technical evidence. But Hollis?" His eyes met hers seriously. "Watch your back. Marrow won't take kindly to anyone threatening his operation." The morning sun climbed higher as they finished documenting the site. The discovery of the AB5 line was more than just evidence. It was proof that Hollis's instincts had been right all along. Something was very wrong at Marrow Preserve. and now they had a tangible lead to follow. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning. Official county letterhead stuck against the weathered wood of the Keene family ranch's mailbox. Hollis's fingers trembled as she read the notice. A $5,000 fine for water overuse, based on meter readings that made her engineering mind spin. "That's completely impossible," she muttered, studying the reported numbers. According to the notice, their small ranch had somehow used more water in a month than most industrial operations did in a year. She knew their modest well system inside and out. It couldn't pump that volume if it ran non-stop for a decade. Her phone buzzed. Rhett's name flashed on the screen. "You too?" She answered. "Yeah." His voice was tight. "Got pulled off active duty this morning. Some complaint came down from the regional office. They've got me pushing papers until further notice." Hollis sank onto the front porch steps, the fine notice crumpling in her grip. "They're trying to scare us off. It's working on my end, officially anyway." Rhett gave a dry laugh. "But I've got some time on my hands now. Maybe we should compare those notes of yours with some public records." They met at the local library that afternoon, claiming a back table away from curious eyes. Hollis spread out her field observations while Rhett logged into the county database. "Look at this," he said, turning his laptop screen. "Every few months, Marrow Preserve puts out emergency appeals for donations, always tied to animals in crisis." Hollis leaned in, scanning the dramatic headlines. "Desert heat claims young lions. Drought threatens sanctuary residents. Emergency water appeal. Help save our animals." "And here's their social media," Rhett continued, pulling up glossy photos. "See how they showcase the rescues, before and after shots, dramatic turnarounds." "Wait." Hollis grabbed her notebook, flipping pages. "That leopard, the dates match. When I found the cub by the dry trough, they're claiming they saved it. They dug deeper, cross-referencing timestamps and locations." A pattern emerged that made Hollis's stomach turn. The crisis events clustered around specific areas of the preserve, areas that matched her mapped route of the AB5 line. "They're engineering it," she whispered, directing water away from certain enclosures, letting the animals get desperately dehydrated, then swooping in for the dramatic save once the donation money flows. Rhett nodded grimly. "And that a B5 line you found? I bet it feeds their private expansion projects, new facilities, fancy visitor centers, all funded by donors who think they're saving animals from natural drought conditions." "It's genius in an awful way," Hollis said. "They steal the water through that illegal line, create artificial emergencies, then profit from public sympathy. Meanwhile, their legitimate wells show normal usage to anyone checking the books. We need ironclad proof." Rhett's jaw was set. Real-time monitoring that shows exactly where that water's flowing. Something they can't explain away or bury in bureaucracy. Hollis pulled out her phone, quickly backing up her photos and notes to a secure cloud account. "I'll get more documentation. Set up redundant copies off-site. They've already shown they'll play dirty." "Be careful," Rhett warned. "I can't officially help anymore, but..." He scribbled on a notepad. "Here's my personal number and some contacts who might be interested in water theft evidence. Keep everything dated and witnessed when possible." The weight of what they'd uncovered settled between them. This wasn't just about water rights anymore. It was systematic abuse masked by charity. Exploitation hiding behind good intentions. "We'll prove it," Hollis said firmly. "Every drop of water, every manufactured crisis, every dollar raised under false pretenses, whatever it takes." Rhett gathered their materials, carefully separating his official documents from their private research. "I've seen a lot of schemes in this job, but using dying animals to squeeze donations." He shook his head. "That's a special kind of cruel." They left separately, taking different routes home. Hollis drove with one eye on her rearview mirror, her mind already mapping out how to document the water flow patterns. She'd need timing data, pressure readings, precise measurements that would stand up to scrutiny. Back at her kitchen table, she sorted her evidence into categories: physical observations, photographic proof, public records, and donor communications. The pieces fit together like a technical diagram: water diverted, animals deprived, crisis manufactured, money raised. Repeat. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rhett. Check Marrow's latest newsletter. Another emergency starting. Sure enough, the preserve's social media was lining up with urgent appeals. Photos showed listless animals and dry water features. The donation counter ticked steadily upward. Hollis checked her maps. The affected area aligned perfectly with her projected path of the Ubity 5 line. They were doing it again, right now, confident that no one could prove the suffering was manufactured. She squared her shoulders, reaching for her tools. They wanted proof? She'd give them proof. Documented, verified, and absolutely undeniable. Let them try to explain away hard data and physical evidence. The truth about a G5 would come out, one careful measurement at a time. Hollis spread the equipment list across her kitchen table, each item carefully printed in her precise engineer's handwriting. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the window as she and Rhett huddled over the paper, planning their next moves. We'll need to measure the flow rate on Aquifer Branch 5 first, Hollis said, tapping her pencil against the list. A manometer will give us exact pressure readings. Then, we'll use the flow logger to track usage patterns. Rhett nodded, his wildlife warden experience showing in his methodical approach. I know the patrol schedules by heart. The pump shed has 3 blind spots we can work with, behind the east wall, the loading dock, and that dip near the fence. Line. Perfect. Hollis sketched a quick diagram. We'll need thermal imaging too. The pump housings will show heat signatures when they're active. And everything gets recorded on body cameras for backup evidence. They chose a Tuesday night 3 weeks out, historically the quietest time at the preserve, based on Rhett's observations. Hollis detailed their sequence of events. Measure baseline flow, briefly close a downstream valve to trigger the preserves. Automatic refill alerts, then document the synchronized pump activation. One wrong move and they'll call it sabotage, Hollis said quietly, her face serious. We have to be precise, technical, leave no room for doubt. That evening, Hollis drove her truck out to the far pasture where an old storage container sat rusting. In the grass, she transferred her essential tools from the truck bed into a heavy-duty lockbox. Flow meters, pressure gauges, data loggers. Everything they'd need for proof, protected from accidents or theft. Back in her computer, she created multiple backups of all their documentation so far. Photographs, notes, measurements. Each file was carefully time-stamped and uploaded to secure cloud storage. She wouldn't let anyone erase their work. I've got the patrol patterns mapped, Rhett said the next day, spreading out a hand-drawn diagram of the preserve. Red X's marked security camera locations, while dotted lines showed guard routes. We'll have approximately 28 minutes between rounds. Hollis practiced the valve sequence in her mind, running through each step. Approach from the blind. Angle, attach the meters, log the baseline, trigger the alert, document the response. Clean, technical, and precise. No room for error. The proof has to be unassailable, she explained to Rhett. We need to show clear cause and effect. Water moving from the aquifer directly to their pumps. No gaps, no assumptions. On a quiet Friday evening, they met at the fence line one last time to finalize the details. The setting sun painted the scrubland in deep oranges and purples as they reviewed their roles one final time. Are you sure about this? Rhett asked softly. The institutions that should help us. They're all looking the other way. Hollis met his gaze steadily. Then we'll do it ourselves. By the book, with solid evidence they can't ignore. They shook, hands in the gathering dusk, a quiet gesture that carried the weight of their commitment. Whatever came next, they would see it through together. Two people standing up against a system designed to silence them. The plan was set. The evidence would speak for itself. And no amount of political pressure could change the simple physics of water flowing where it shouldn't. The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when Hollis stepped out of her house and stopped dead in her tracks. Something wasn't right. A dark puddle spread beneath her truck, its sharp chemical smell hitting her nose. Her heart sank as she crouched down to inspect the damage. No, she muttered, running her fingers along the fuel line. A clean slice marked the rubber. Hose. This was no accident. The cut was precise, meant to drain the tank slowly overnight. Mara was sending a message. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Mom's number flashed on the screen. Honey, her mother's voice trembled slightly. I just got the strangest call. Some man asking about Dad's old water rights, saying we should be careful about stirring up trouble. He didn't give his name, but Hollis's grip tightened on her phone. Are you okay, Mom? I'm fine. Just rattled. What's going on, Hollis? Just some work stuff, Hollis said, trying to keep her voice steady. Lock the doors and call me if anything else happens, okay? After hanging up, she texted Rhett. They're playing hardball now. His response came quickly. Notice 2 unmarked. Trucks following me yesterday. Black Ford, silver Chevy. Taking different routes now. Watch your back. Hollis stood in her garage, surrounded by tools and parts. Her father's old workbench stood against the wall, his fix it right or don't fix. Its sign still hanging above it. She grabbed what she needed and got to work on the fuel line. An hour later, sweat dripping from her forehead, she had patched the line as best she could. It would hold, but she didn't trust it for their night operation. She called her friend at the well service company. Hey, Jake, any chance I could borrow one of the work trucks tonight? Mine's giving me trouble. Sure thing, Hollis. Keys will be in the usual spot. She spent the afternoon double-checking their equipment. Flow meters, pressure gauges, cameras. Everything had to work perfectly. They'd only get one shot at this. She drove out to a quiet stretch of road and found an old culvert, carefully wrapping a spare data card in waterproof material and hiding it inside. Back home, Hollis pulled out her father's old leather notebook. The pages were worn, filled with detailed observations about the aquifer's behavior. His neat handwriting documented decades of water levels, flow patterns, and careful stewardship. Water's life out here, he'd always said. We don't own it. We just guard it for the next generation. Reading his words steadied her nerves. This wasn't just about catching marrow. It was about protecting something essential, something her father had understood deep in his bones. Her phone buzzed again. Rhett. They pulled my badge, he said without preamble. Some complained about harassment. It's temporary, they say, but we both know better. Rhett, you don't have to. Don't even start, he cut her off. Badge or no badge? I'm seeing this through. We move tonight. Hollis nodded to herself. Earlier than planned? The longer we wait, the more chances they have to stop us. Meet me at sunset. As day faded into dusk, Hollis loaded her equipment into Jake's borrowed truck. The familiar weight of her father's notebook in her jacket pocket gave her courage. She drove carefully, taking back roads to avoid being spotted. Rhett was waiting at their meeting point, his personal truck parked in the shadow of an old windmill. His face was grim, but determined in the fading light. Ready? He asked, simply. Ready, she replied, checking her watch. Aquifer Branch 5 is about 2 miles east. We'll have to go on foot from here. They transferred the essential gear to their backpacks. The night air was cool and still as they began their careful approach across the scrubland. Stars emerged overhead, offering just enough light to navigate by. Hollis felt the weight of what they were about to do, not just the equipment in her pack, but the responsibility of proving what Marrow was doing. The cut fuel line and threatening phone call had only strengthened her resolve. Some things were worth fighting for, worth taking risks for. She glanced at Rhett walking beside her. No longer a wildlife warden officially, but still every bit the protector. They moved carefully through the darkness, each step bringing them closer to the truth they needed to expose. The pipeline marker for Aquifer Branch 5 gleamed faintly ahead in their flashlight beams. Hollis took a deep breath, focusing her mind on the technical steps ahead. Flow measurements, pressure readings, documentation. The facts would speak for themselves. They just had to gather them properly. They crouched in the darkness beside the pipeline access point, their breath visible in the cool night air. The moment stretched taut with anticipation as they prepared to begin their careful documentation of the truth. Hollis spread the documents across her kitchen table while Rhett paced nearby, his weathered hands clasping a steaming mug of coffee. Stacks of donor records and incident logs from Marrow Preserve formed neat piles, each telling part of a story that was becoming clearer and more disturbing by the minute. "Look at this," Hollis said, her finger tracing down a column of dates. The Leopard Cub's escape happened exactly 3 days before their biggest fundraising drive of the year. She pulled another paper from a different stack. And here, the incident report shows the cub was found dehydrated just outside preserve property. Rhett leaned over her shoulder, frowning. "That's convenient. No fines or inspections if it happens. Off their land. Too convenient," Hollis muttered. She grabbed another document, this one a glossy newsletter sent to donors. Her stomach churned as she read the dramatic account of the cub's rescue, complete with heart-wrenching photos and urgent appeals for donations. "They used my compassion," she whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. They knew someone would find that cub. They counted on it. Her hands trembled slightly as she sorted through more papers. Look at these patterns. Every major donation drive is preceded by some kind of crisis with the animals. Dehydration, exposure, escapes that end in dramatic rescues. Rhett pulled up a chair beside her, his face grim. They're manufacturing emergencies. The cub wasn't an accident. It was bait. Bait for donations, Hollis agreed, feeling sick. And I played right into their hands, giving them exactly the dramatic rescue story they wanted. She stood up suddenly, needing to move. The violation of it all made her skin crawl. These were living creatures being deliberately put at risk, their suffering orchestrated for profit. The leopard cub's cracked tongue and fading pulse flashed through her memory. No longer a tragic accident, but a calculated act of cruelty. "We need to adjust our approach," Rhett said, his voice steady despite the anger she could see in his eyes. "If that cub or any other animal show up again, their safety has to be our first priority." Hollis nodded, drawing a deep breath. "And we need more than just proof of the water theft. We need to show how it all connects. The diverted water, the staged crises, the donation patterns." She grabbed a fresh notepad and began writing. Alert. Logs from their security system will show when they knew about escaped animals. Heat signatures from the pumps will prove when they're restricting water flow. And we need clear footage of those of B5 identifiers on the lines. Show exactly where the diverted water is going. The more context we capture, the harder it'll be for them to twist the narrative, Rhett agreed. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through his photos of the property. "I've got some wider shots of the pump shed area. We should document every angle, every approach." Hollis felt her initial shock and her crystallizing into renewed determination. They're not just stealing water, she said quietly. They're using it to create artificial crises, manipulating people's compassion for profit. And they're willing to let animals suffer to do it. Rhett rested a hand on her shoulder. Then we'll stop them. Not just the theft, but all of it. They spent the next hour refining their documentation plan. Hollis sketched out optimal camera positions, while Rhett listed the types of evidence they'd need. Time-stamped footage, thermal readings, flow measurements, all carefully coordinated to tell the complete story. We'll need multiple cameras running, Hollis said, marking spots on her rough map. Here, and here. Wide enough angles to capture context, but focused enough to clearly show the AB5 markings and pump operations. I'll bring extra battery packs, Rhett said, and backup memory cards. We can't risk missing anything because of technical issues. Hollis nodded, then paused, staring down at the donor newsletter with its manipulated story of the leopard cubs. Rescue. We have to get this right, she said softly. Not just for the water rights, but for every animal they've put at risk for their schemes. We will, Rhett assured her. They've been hiding behind half-truths and manufactured emergencies. But real evidence, properly documented? That's something they can't spin away. They continued refining their plans as afternoon faded toward evening. Their shared purpose stronger than ever. The truth about the leopard cub had changed everything. But instead of breaking their resolve, it had only made it clearer why their mission mattered so much. The old metal box creaked as Hollis opened. It dust dancing in the beam of afternoon light streaming through her father's study window. Inside lay his life's work, carefully preserved hydrology maps of the region, each one hand-drawn with meticulous detail. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted out the weathered papers. Memories of watching him work at his desk flooding back. Dad always said these underground passages were like the county's veins, she murmured, spreading a particularly detailed map across the desk. The yellowed paper showed an intricate network of survey shafts and water lines, including one that made her heart skip. A maintenance shaft that intersected directly with Aquifer Branch 5's main trunk line dot at the bottom of the box. A heavy brass key caught the light. The windlass key. She remembered her father explaining how it operated the old survey shaft mechanisms. She wrapped her fingers around it, the metal warm and familiar in her palm. This changes everything, she said, looking up at Rhett, who stood examining the maps. We don't have to risk the main access points. This shaft will give us perfect positioning for the sensors, plus a safe observation point. Rhett nodded slowly, tracing the shaft's path with his finger. I'll need to check the garb rotations first. Even an old access point needs to be approached carefully. How long will you need? Give me 24 hours. I may be officially benched, but I still know how to move quietly. His eyes crinkled with determination. I'll track their patterns, find the gaps. The next day passed with agonizing slowness as Hollis prepared their equipment. She checked and rechecked the flow logger, making sure its batteries were fresh and its memory clear. The sensor cables were coiled neatly, ready to deploy quickly. Her father's windlass key sat heavy in her pocket, a tangible link to his legacy of protecting the aquifer. When Rhett returned that evening, his report was encouraging. They're running 3-man rotations, but there's a consistent 15-minute gap between shift changes near the old maintenance sector. If we time it right, we'll have our window. Under the cover of darkness, they approached the hidden shaft entrance. Thick brush had grown around the old metal cover, providing natural concealment. Hollis inserted the windlass key with trembling fingers, and the mechanism turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting all these years for this moment. The shaft descended. At a gentle angle, concrete walls, still solid after decades. Their flashlights revealed old maintenance markings and distance markers. At the intersection with a B5's trunk line, Hollis carefully positioned the flow logger, securing its sensors to the pipe. Ready? She whispered to Rhett, who had his thermal camera trained on the distant pump housings visible through a ventilation. Great. All set. Make it quick. With practiced movements, Hollis located the control valve and gave it a quarter turn, holding her breath as she counted to 10. The effect was immediate, a change in pressure that would trigger the preserve's automated systems. She quickly returned the valve to its original position and activated the flow logger's recording sequence. Through his thermal scope, Rhett captured the telling heat signatures as the pumps responded to the pressure change. Got it, he whispered. Clear spikes in activity, right on schedule. They waited 5 more minutes, collecting the crucial time-stamp data that would prove the connection between the water diversion and marrow systems. When they finally extracted, every step was careful, methodical. The shaft entrance was restored to its hidden state, looking undisturbed in the moonlight dot in Rhett's truck, parked safely away from the preserve. They reviewed the data. Hollis's hands shook with excitement as she compared the timestamps. The flow logger's readings aligned perfectly with the thermal spikes from the pump, housing irrefutable proof of the illegal water diversion. Look at these numbers, she said, voice thick with emotion. Source, diversion, consumption, it's all here. There's no way they can explain this away. Rhett studied the readouts, a slow smile spreading across his face. This is solid, Hollis. Really solid, but he paused, tapping the screen. We should get one more reading from the pump house itself. Get a clear shot of that a B5 stamp on the manifold. That would lock everything down tight. Hollis nodded, already thinking through the approach. The evidence they had gathered felt like a weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time since finding that dying leopard cub, she felt real hope that justice might actually be possible. We'll need to be quick, she said, carefully storing their precious data in multiple secure locations. One more pass just to get that manifold. Stamp documented. Then we can finally blow this whole thing wide open. The chain of evidence was there, clear, technical, and damning. They had proof of exactly how Marrow was stealing water and manipulating his preserve systems. Tomorrow, they would get that final piece of documentation. But for now, they had succeeded in capturing the crucial data that could bring truth to light. The night air hung heavy with tension as Hollis and Rhett approached the pump house for their final reading. Everything had gone according to plan so far. The evidence was solid, the data logged, but they needed one last piece. Clear. Documentation of the Aquifer Branch 5 stamp on the pump manifold. Hollis checked her body cam, making sure the light blinked steadily. Just in and out, she whispered. 5 minutes tops. The old metal door creaked as they slipped inside. The familiar hum of machinery filled the space, accompanied by the faint smell of oil and metal. Hollis moved purposefully toward the main pump assembly, her flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. Without warning, a deafening explosion rocked the building. Flames erupted from somewhere behind the main control panel, spreading with frightening speed. The blast knocked Hollis off her feet, slamming her against the concrete floor. Heat rolled over her in suffocating waves. Hollis! Rhett's voice carried from outside, followed by the sound of a scuffle and a heavy thud. She tried to scramble up, but white-hot pain shot through her leg. Through the thickening smoke, she saw the problem. A fallen support beam had pinned her, lower leg to the floor. The wood was already starting to catch fire. Rhett? She called out, coughing as acrid smoke filled her lungs. No answer came. The fire was spreading fast, eating up the old wooden framework of the building. Sweat poured down her face as she yanked at her trapped leg, but the beam wouldn't budge. The smoke was getting thicker by the second. Think. Her eyes landed on a small maintenance sink in the corner. Pulling herself along the floor, she managed to reach it with her upper body. The tap still worked. Thank goodness. She soaked her bandana in the cool water and pressed it over her nose and mouth. The heat was becoming unbearable. Flames danced across the ceiling, and burning debris rained down around her. There was a vent grate low on the wall, maybe 3 feet away. If she could just get someone's attention. Using her free leg and arms, she dragged herself closer to the vent. The metal grate was old and rusted. She pounded on it with her fist, the sound seeming pathetically quiet against the roar of the fire. Then she heard it, a familiar rasping chuff. Through the gaps in the vent grate, she saw movement. The leopard cub, the same one she'd saved before, was pressing its face against the grate from the outside. Its high-pitched calls pierced through the crackling of the flames. "Hey, little one," she croaked through her wet bandana. "Good to see you again." The cub's cries grew louder, more insistent. In the distance, she heard shouts and running feet. The preserve's patrol, drawn by the commotion. The cub had brought help. Flashlight beams cut through the smoke near the vent. "Someone's in there," a voice called out. "Get that grate off now." The sound of metal scraping against metal filled the air as multiple hands worked to pry the grate free. Hollis could barely see through the thick smoke now, but she heard the grate clatter to the ground. "Ma'am, can you reach the opening?" Someone called through the vent. Hollis stretched out her arm, her wet palm extending through the space where the grate had been. The cub immediately pressed its head against her hand, its fur damp with evening dew. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, a moment of connection amid the chaos. "The beam, my legs trapped," she managed to say between coughs. More voices joined the rescue effort. The sound of sirens grew closer, and then the main door burst open. Emergency responders in protective gear swarmed in, working quickly to lift the burning beam off her leg dot as they carried her out. Her body cam still faithfully recording, the flames illuminated the pump manifold behind her. There, clear as day, the stamp reading, a B5, glowed in the firelight, irrefutable evidence of the illegal connection to Aquifer Branch 5. Later, she would learn that the footage had already begun spreading online. The dramatic rescue, the tender moment with the cub, and most importantly, the damning a B5 stamp visible in the background. Within hours, it would be viewed thousands of times. By morning, search warrants would be issued, and Marrow's carefully constructed facade would begin to crumble. But in that moment, being loaded into an ambulance with smoke-stained clothes and a badly bruised leg, Hollis could only think about the cub. It stood at the edge of the gathered crowd, watching her with those same intelligent eyes that had first caught her attention by the dry trough so many weeks ago. In its own way, it had returned the favor, saving her just as she had once saved it. The morning after the fire brought swift action. Judge Martinez signed the search warrants at exactly 6:15 in the morning, his signature barely dry before enforcement teams began mobilizing. Hollis watched from her truck as patrol cars and animal control vehicles assembled at the county staging area, their lights reflecting off the dawn mist. Her phone buzzed, another unknown number. The third one today. She let it go to voicemail, already knowing what it would be. The first 2 calls had been from lawyers representing concerned private parties, offering substantial compensation in exchange for her silence. They danced around the specifics, using phrases like mutual resolution and confidential settlement. But the message was clear. Take the money. Drop the case. Hollis deleted the voicemail without listening to it. No amount of money could make this right. "They tried calling you too?" Red asked, walking up with 2 paper cups of coffee. He handed one to her. "3 times now," she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Different numbers each time." Red nodded, leaning against her truck. "Got 2 calls myself." Mara's trying to buy his way out, but he's too late. The evidence is already logged, and the warrants are active. Inside the staging area, veterinarians and wildlife specialists were reviewing transfer plans. Each animal from the preserve would, be evaluated and moved to legitimate sanctuaries and rehabilitation centers. The logistics were complex. Different facilities specialized in different species, and many of the animals would need immediate medical attention. "How's the coordination going?" Hollis asked, nodding toward the gathering. "As smooth as we can make it," Rhett replied. "I've been working with the animal welfare team since dawn. We've got facilities lined up in 4 states ready to take them. The priority is keeping the stress levels down during transport." He pulled out his phone, showing her a map marked with facility locations. "The big cats will go to sanctuaries in Arizona and New Mexico. The hoof stock has spaces waiting in Colorado. Local rehab centers can handle the smaller animals." Hollis studied the plan. "And the AB5 line?" "That's my main focus right now," Rhett said. "I've got a team dedicated just to documenting and securing the illegal connection. We'll trace it from source to endpoint, photograph everything, and maintain chain of custody on all the evidence." A commotion near the command tent drew their attention. One of the deputies was speaking urgently into his radio. Rhett straightened up, his expression turning serious. "What is it?" Hollis asked. "Word just came in," he said quietly. "Marrow's been spotted loading equipment onto trucks. They're saying he's planning to move it through the old riverbed, heading toward some kind of hidden water storage." Hollis's mind immediately went to the survey map she'd inherited from her father. "The cistern," she said. "There's an old cistern system that connects to that dry riverbed. It was part of the original ranch infrastructure before Marrow bought the land." She spread the maps across her truck's hood, pointing to a network of dotted lines. "See these markings? They show the underground water storage network. That cistern would be perfect for hiding evidence. It's deep, hard to find if you don't. Know where to look, and it connects to multiple exit points." Rhett studied the maps intently. "We need to stop him before he can move anything. Once that equipment disappears on the ground, it'll be twice as hard to recover." "The survey shaft," Hollis said, tapping another point on the map. "It's closer than trying to chase him through the riverbed. We can use it to cut him off before he reaches the cistern." They looked at each other, both understanding the gravity of what came next. This wasn't about triumph or revenge. It was about ending things properly, illegally, with Marrow alive and able to face justice. Hollis walked to her truck's toolbox and pulled out her old windlass kit. The equipment was well maintained, each piece cleaned and tested regularly. She'd already documented it as part of the emergency response plan attached to the warrants, making its use fully legal and above board. "I'll need about 20 minutes to set up the windlass system," she said, checking the cables and harness. "The shaft's stable. My father reinforced it years ago, but we'll still need to take proper safety precautions." Rhett nodded, already on his radio coordinating with the other officers. They would need to time this carefully, maintaining clear communication while avoiding tipping their hand too early. As Hollis prepared the equipment, she felt a strange calm settle over her. The path ahead was narrow but clear. They would intercept Marrow, prevent him from destroying evidence, and ensure the animals reach safety. Every step would be by the book, every action documented and legal. The windlass setup took shape methodically. She checked each connection twice, testing the brake mechanism and emergency release. The system would serve as their access point, allowing them to reach the underground junction before Marrow could move his equipment through. "Teams are in position," Rhett reported, returning from a brief meeting with his fellow officers. "We've got people watching both ends of the riverbed, but they're staying back far enough not to spook him. Medical units are standing by, just in case." Hollis finished securing the last cable anchor. "Good. We do this right. No one gets hurt. Marrow faces charges, the animals get proper care, and the evidence stays intact." She stood up, brushing dust from her hands, and looked at the survey shaft entrance. The old metal cover had been well maintained, its hinges still smooth and solid. Below, the The shaft dropped 40 feet before intersecting with the sister network, a straight shot to where their paths would converge. "Ready?" Rhett asked. Hollis double-checked her safety harness, then nodded. "Ready." The morning sun climbed higher as they made their final preparations, casting long shadows across the equipment laid out beside the shaft. Everything was in place for the confrontation ahead, one that would need to balance firm resolution with careful restraint. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and purples as dust kicked up from Marrow's convoy of trucks moving stealthily along the dry riverbed. The rumble of engines carried through the still morning air to where Hollis waited by. The survey shaft, her heart beating steady despite the tension. Through her radio earpiece, she heard Rhett's whispered update. 3 vehicles heading your way. Moving slow, trying to stay quiet. Hollis checked the emergency sluice controls one final time. The mechanism was simple but effective, a reinforced valve that could redirect water flow from the main aquifer line. She'd already calculated the precise amount needed, enough pressure to halt Marrow's escape without causing serious harm. "Copy that," she whispered back. "I'm in position." The convoy's headlights flickered through the trees, growing closer. Hollis could make out the lead truck now, loaded with pump equipment. Her fingers tightened on the sluice control lever as she counted down the distance. Just as the vehicles reached a crucial point, where the riverbed narrowed between 2 limestone walls, Hollis pulled the lever. The reaction was immediate. Water rushed through the emergency line, a controlled surge that swept around the bend exactly as planned. The lead truck, Marrow's personal vehicle, jerked to a stop as water rose around its wheels. She heard shouts of surprise, then the distinctive sound of doors opening as people tried to escape the rising water. Through her binoculars, she spotted Marrow himself attempting to wade toward his own valve gate, the very infrastructure he'd used to steal water now becoming his trap. "Now," Hollis radioed to Rhett. Law enforcement vehicles appeared at both ends of the riverbed, lights flashing. The water levels stabilized, exactly as designed, keeping Marrow pinned against his gate without putting him in real danger. Rhett splashed through the knee-deep water, reaching Marrow before he could attempt anything desperate. "Clint Marrow." Rhett's voice carried clearly across the water. "You're under arrest for water theft, animal abuse, and fraud." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Evidence teams documented everything, following careful protocols to preserve the chain of custody. The illegal Aquifer Branch 5 connection was fully exposed, its elaborate diversion system now serving as proof rather than a tool of theft. When they finally led Marrow past her in handcuffs, he tried to catch her eye. "I can make this worth your while," he said quietly. "Name your price." Hollis turned away, focusing instead on helping catalog the seized equipment. His money held no appeal, not when she could see emergency vehicles arriving to safely transport the animals to accredited sanctuaries. The court proceedings stretched over several weeks. Hollis testified clearly and confidently, presenting technical evidence about the water theft and its impact on both the aquifer and the animals. When Marrow's lawyers approached with settlement offers, increasingly large sums paired with non-disclosure agreements, she declined each one without hesitation. The judge's sentence, when it came, was appropriately severe. Standing outside the courthouse afterward, Hollis felt a weight lift from her shoulders as reporters gathered their equipment and drove away. "You did good," Rhett said, joining her on the courthouse steps. "Really good." She smiled, thinking about the offer she'd received that morning. "The County Water Board wants me to help restore Aquifer Branch 5, she said. "Make it right, the way my father would have wanted. Water belongs to the living," Rhett quoted her. Father's words back to her, not to thieves or con men. Their eyes met, and something quiet and understanding passed between them. There was no need for grand gestures or public declarations. Their trust had been forged in shared danger and mutual respect, something far more valuable than headlines or dramatic moments. 2 months later, Hollis stood at the observation window of an accredited wildlife sanctuary, watching the leopard cub, now growing into a healthy young adult. The cat lounged on a proper climbing structure, well-fed and content behind appropriate safety barriers. It was a far cry from the desperate, dehydrated creature she'd first encountered. "He's doing great," the sanctuary veterinarian told her. "Regular meals, clean water, proper space to roam. This is what a real sanctuary looks like." Hollis nodded, thinking about how much had changed. The aquifer restoration project was proceeding well. The water table was recovering. And here was living proof that doing the right thing, no matter how difficult, led to real change. As she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the observation window. The woman looking back at her stood straighter, more confident. She'd held on to her integrity, helped serve justice, and somehow found exactly what she needed along the way, though it had come in forms she'd never expected. The leopard stretched lazily in its enclosure, safe and well cared for. It was the perfect reminder that sometimes the best rewards come not from taking what you want, but from protecting what matters most. Thank you for watching. If even one moment stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow with another story that speaks to the heart.